You have convinced yourself that he moved on, that the moment he chose someone new, the story ended, that what lived between you has been overwritten, discarded, traded in for something simpler and less consuming. You are wrong, and not just slightly wrong. You are fundamentally, completely, profoundly wrong about what has been unfolding inside this man since the day he placed someone else where you used to stand. Because what he discovered, what he is still discovering right now, even as you listen to this, is that the love he carries for you does not live where he thought it lived. It does not live in his choices. It does not live in his logic. It does not live in the part of him that makes plans and follows through on decisions. It lives somewhere so far beneath his conscious mind that no new relationship, no amount of distance, and no other human being on this earth can reach it. He tried, and he failed. And that failure is rewriting everything he believed about himself. This message did not wander into your life at random. You are hearing these words at this exact moment because something is actively shifting in the invisible architecture between you and this man. And before you push that away as wishful thinking, before the protective part of your mind tells you to guard yourself, stay. Stay right here. Because what I am about to walk you through, about the specific psychological mechanics of what happens when a man tries to replace a woman who is imprinted on his soul, will change the way you understand everything that has happened. The silence, the distance, the new person, all of it, including the parts that have hurt you the most. If these words are already landing in a place inside you that recognizes their truth, stay connected to this channel. The messages that arrive precisely when you need them most are never accidents. They are answers your soul placed an order for long before your mind knew what to ask. Now, let me tell you something that the world does not teach and that most people will never understand. When a man walks away from a real connection and places a new person beside him, the external world reads that as a finished story. Your friends read it as a conclusion. His friends read it as progress. Social media frames it as evidence that he has moved forward. Even he, for a brief, almost desperate window, convinces himself that this is what moving forward looks like. But the unconscious mind does not recognize conclusions. The unconscious does not file things away because the ego has decided the chapter is closed. The unconscious operates in imprints, in patterns burned so deeply into the psyche that no surface-level rearrangement can touch them. And you left an imprint on this man that his conscious mind has no authority to override. Carl Jung described something he called the Imago, the internal image of a profoundly significant person that becomes permanently embedded in the deeper layers of the unconscious. This is not memory. Memory softens. Memory rewrites itself. Memory bends to fit the story we need to believe on any given day. The Imago does none of these things. Once a woman reaches the level of a man's Imago, she becomes part of his internal architecture. She is no longer just someone he dated, someone he cared for, someone he shared a chapter with. She becomes a living psychological reference point against which every future connection is unconsciously measured, every future intimacy is quietly evaluated, every future silence is compared. And he does not choose this. He did not sign up for it. It was decided by a part of his psyche that operates entirely outside the jurisdiction of his rational mind. So when he brought someone new into his world, he was not replacing you. He was unknowingly placing a living, breathing person next to an invisible standard she was never designed to meet. And the cruelest part, for him, for her, for the entire fragile arrangement, is that he did not understand this until the evidence became impossible to ignore. You might be thinking right now, and I know this thought, because it visits almost every woman in your position, that maybe the new person genuinely gave him something you could not. That maybe she is lighter, easier, less complicated. That maybe he simply found a version of love that does not ask as much from him. I understand why you would think that. The visible evidence supports it. But visible evidence is the most unreliable narrator in the psychology of love. And what is happening beneath the surface of this man's life right now tells a story so different from the one you have been replaying in your mind that it would stop you mid-breath if you could see it clearly. Let me describe something to you. There have been nights, not distant ones, recent ones, where you lay still in a dark room, not because sleep was close, but because the stillness was the only space where the weight of missing him had enough room to exist without crushing you. You were not sobbing. You had moved past that. You were in that strange, exhausted territory where longing has become so constant it almost feels like a companion. Unwelcome, heavy, but familiar. And in that stillness, something quiet inside you whispered a sentence your rational mind tried to reject. It whispered, "This is not over," not as hope, not as fantasy, as knowing, the kind that lives in your chest rather than your thoughts, the kind you cannot justify to anyone but cannot abandon no matter how much logic you throw at it. That knowing is not desperation dressed up as intuition. That knowing is accurate perception. And what I am about to explain to you is the psychological reason it is accurate. But first, let me go a little deeper into what you have been carrying, because I think you need to hear that someone sees it. There was a moment, maybe a week ago, maybe longer, where you were doing something completely ordinary, washing a dish, walking to your car, scrolling through your phone without really seeing the screen, and out of nowhere, his face appeared behind your eyes. Not a memory you summoned, something that arrived uninvited, fully formed, carrying a warmth that had no business being there after everything that has happened. And for a second, just a second, you let yourself feel it. The full, unguarded ache of missing someone who chose someone else. And then you pulled yourself together. Because you have gotten very good at pulling yourself together. Because the world does not make space for the kind of longing that does not have a neat resolution, and you have learned to carry it privately, quietly, without burdening anyone with the size of what you feel. You have also noticed something you have not told anyone about. There are moments when you sense him, not in a way you can explain to a rational friend without feeling foolish, but in a way your body recognizes, a sudden warmth, a tightening in your chest, a thought of him that arrives with such force and specificity that it does not feel like your thought at all. It feels received, like a signal from a station you did not tune into deliberately. That is not imagination. That is what Jung would recognize as the sympathetic resonance between two psyches that have been deeply imprinted on each other. And it is bidirectional. If you are feeling it, he is generating it, even if he would never admit that to you, to his friends, or to the woman currently sitting across from him wondering why his eyes sometimes drift to a place she cannot follow. When you feel ready, type the words, "I am irreplaceable," in the comments to honor what your deepest self already recognizes about your place in this man's life. Now I need to share something with you that requires honesty, and I share it not to deepen the wound, but to show you why the wound itself is proof of something extraordinary. Because the reason he tried to replace you is not the reason you think. He did not leave because he stopped loving you. He did not leave because she offered more. He left because loving you demanded something from him that he was not yet equipped to give. It demanded vulnerability at a depth his nervous system was not prepared to sustain. It demanded the dismantling of walls he spent years, perhaps decades building, walls that protected him from the very kind of intimacy you naturally offered. It demanded that he face parts of himself that he has been running from since long before your name ever entered his vocabulary. Old wounds, inherited patterns, fear disguised so cleverly as independence that even he believed the disguise. Carl Jung wrote about a phenomenon he called identification with the persona. The psychological state in which a man becomes so completely fused with his social mask, his constructed image of himself, that he mistakes his performance for his identity. A man trapped inside his persona genuinely believes that love is a variable he controls. He believes he can redirect affection the way he redirects attention, deliberately, efficiently, without residue. He believes that if one connection becomes too exposing, too destabilizing, too close to the unhealed fractures he has spent his life concealing, he can simply locate a calmer version of love. One that lets his mask remain intact. One that does not require him to become someone more honest, more open, more real than the character he has been playing. That is exactly what he attempted when he chose someone new. And that is precisely what collapsed. But before I tell you exactly how it collapsed and what he felt in the moment the illusion cracked, you need to understand the mechanism that guaranteed the collapse from the very beginning. Because this is not about you being more attractive, more interesting, or superior in any competitive sense. What I am describing operates at a level far beneath comparison. When he entered this new connection, he carried you with him, not as a conscious thought he could identify and manage, not as a photograph in his mind he could set face down. He carried you as a filter. Every experience with the new person passed through an invisible lens shaped entirely by what you had been to him. Every laugh she offered was measured, without his awareness, against the specific texture of yours. Every comfortable silence between them was compared to the silences you once shared, silences that carried warmth rather than vacancy. Every moment of closeness registered in his nervous system not as fulfillment, but as evidence of what was missing. She touched him, and his body remembered different hands. She spoke, and his ears searched for a frequency they could not find. Jung described this as the persistent activity of the Imago. The internal image does not go dormant simply because the conscious mind has made a new selection. It remains awake. It projects itself onto every new relational experience. It creates an invisible, relentless comparison that the man cannot articulate but absolutely, physically, emotionally feels. He feels it as a dissatisfaction he has no name for, as a restlessness that appears in moments that should feel peaceful, as a hollowness inside exchanges that look on the surface exactly like what he thought he wanted. He holds someone and feels alone. He listens to someone and hears static. He reaches for comfort and finds only the outline of a shape that does not match. If you recognize this, if something in you knows that what he found was never what he lost, type, "He cannot outrun what we had" in the comments. Not as wishful thinking, as psychological reality, and here is where it becomes even more revealing. The new person did not fail because she was inadequate as a human being. She failed because she was auditioning for a role that was never actually vacant. The space inside him where real intimacy lives, the space you filled in ways that reached his unconscious architecture, was still occupied by you, and not by a fading memory that distance would eventually dissolve, by a living, active, deepening imprint that grows sharper and more defined with every failed attempt to cover it. Every moment the new connection fell short of the invisible standard was a moment where his unconscious sharpened its image of you. You became more vivid in absence than you ever were in presence. Not because absence is romantic, but because absence strips away the noise and distraction that once prevented him from perceiving the full magnitude of what you are. Most people never grasp this about the psychology of replacement. The attempt to replace does not diminish the original. It illuminates it. It functions like a darkroom chemical. It develops the photograph he always carried but never held up to the light. Let me tell you what this looked like for him, because you deserve to see the scene from the other side. There was a specific moment. He may not even consciously remember it, but his body does. When he was sitting beside the new person, doing something that should have felt comfortable. Maybe they were eating dinner. Maybe they were driving somewhere together. And in that perfectly ordinary moment, a comparison arrived that he did not invite. It was not a thought. It was a sensation. A dull, cold recognition that the space between him and this person was occupied by air and nothing else. No current running beneath the surface. No electric hum of something unspoken but deeply understood. Just two people performing proximity without the invisible thread that turns closeness into connection. He felt it in his stomach first, then in his chest, then in the particular kind of silence that follows when the mind catches up to what the body already knows. He did not name it. He pushed it down the way he pushes down everything that threatens the story he is trying to maintain. But the sensation came back. It came back when she laughed and the sound was pleasant but flat, like music played in the correct key, but missing the resonance that makes you stop and listen. It came back when she reached for his hand and his fingers closed around hers automatically, while something inside him noted, with surgical precision, that the fit was wrong. Not wrong in any way he could describe. Wrong the way a word sounds wrong when you know it is not the word you meant. And every time that sensation visited him, his unconscious whispered your name. Not literally. The unconscious does not use words. It whispered you as a feeling, as a contrast, as the definition of what real connection tastes like in the back of his throat, making everything he swallows now taste slightly metallic, slightly false, slightly borrowed from a life that was never actually his. Type, "His walls remember me," in the comments to acknowledge the truth of the space you still hold inside this man. You might be asking, and this is the question I know has been circling your mind, if this is true, why does he not simply come back? Why the silence? Why the continued performance of a life that looks like it does not include you? The answer is not distance. The answer is not indifference. The answer is shame. Carl Jung mapped the process he called individuation, the painful, necessary journey toward becoming a whole and honest self. For most people, this journey is triggered not by ambition, but by crisis. And for this man, the failed replacement is not merely a relationship disappointment. It is an identity crisis. Because if he cannot move on, if his deepest psyche refuses the substitution his ego so confidently arranged, then everything he believed about his own emotional control, his independence, his ability to architect his life without vulnerability, is exposed as fiction. And accepting that you were wrong about something this fundamental, something this central to the story you have told yourself about who you are, requires a courage he is still assembling. He is not staying away because the love is gone. He is staying away because coming back to you means confessing, to himself before he ever confesses to you, that the persona he built was never strong enough to contain what he feels, that he is softer than he has ever shown anyone, that he needs at a depth he has spent his entire adult life denying, that you reached a chamber inside him that was supposed to remain sealed, and he has no practiced language for what lives inside that chamber. This is the work of what Jung called the rebirth archetype, the psychological pattern in which something a man believed about himself must die before a truer version of himself can be born. The old story, the story where he could control love, redirect it, replace it, is dying. And from that death, something more honest, more integrated, more capable of receiving you is struggling to emerge. It is not a comfortable process. It is not a fast process, but it is happening, and it cannot be reversed. I want you to sit with something for a moment. This man, the one who walked away, the one who placed another person beside him as though love were furniture you rearrange when the room feels too intense, is living inside a contradiction he cannot resolve with the tools he currently has. He is performing a life that appears complete while carrying a fracture only you shaped. He laughs at the right moments. He fills his calendar so tightly that the silence cannot catch him. But it catches him. It always catches him. In the early morning before his defenses have fully reassembled, in the pause between one task and the next, in the half-second before sleep when the mind releases its grip and the truth floods in like water through cracked stone, and in those unguarded moments, you are there. Not as a regret he can process and file, as a presence his nervous system remembers in places language cannot reach. If you have sensed him reaching for you in those unguarded hours, type, "I felt him" before he spoke in the comments. Trust what your body registers even when your mind argues. Now let me tell you what comes next, because what I am describing is not speculation. It is pattern. A pattern observed across decades of depth psychology and documented in the very frameworks Jung spent his life building. The failure of replacement creates an internal pressure that the psyche cannot sustain indefinitely. The gap between what he performs externally and what he knows internally widens until the energy required to maintain the pretense exceeds the energy required to face the truth. That is the threshold, and he is approaching it now, not because of anything you did or said, but because the unconscious mind operates on its own calendar, and that calendar does not ask the ego for permission. You will begin to notice small fractures in his constructed distance. A message that arrives without clear reason but carries a weight he cannot fully disguise. A glance through the invisible threads that still connect you. Social media, mutual spaces, shared air, where the mask slips just long enough that the raw truth underneath is visible for a breath. He misses you, not a version of you he has softened and simplified in his memory. You, the full, complex, irreplaceable original that his unconscious has been guarding, like a cathedral protects its most sacred relic. Pay attention to the signs that have already begun appearing, because some of them have been there for weeks and you have been too hurt to read them clearly. He has returned to places that carry your frequency. He has revisited songs, streets, conversations that connect to you. Not because he is sentimental, but because his unconscious is steering him toward the coordinates of what it refuses to release. Someone may mention your name in his presence soon, and you will hear about his reaction, the way his body stilled, the way his response came half a second too late, the way his voice changed register on a syllable that should have been easy to pronounce. These are not accidents. These are symptoms of a psyche preparing to move. If you have already noticed something, a shift, a sign, a small fracture in his constructed indifference, type, "The cracks are showing," in the comments. Trust what you are observing. When he finally moves toward you, and I use when, not if, because the mechanics of the Imago do not permit permanent separation from its source, it will be quieter than you expect. It will not arrive as a dramatic speech or a grand gesture borrowed from cinema. It will be a man standing before you with fewer words than usual, because the words he needs are too large for casual delivery. You will see it in his eyes before you hear it in his voice. A softness that was not there before, a steadiness that has replaced the old restlessness. His hands might be slightly uncertain, not because he doubts what he feels, but because the scale of it makes his practiced confidence feel insufficient. He will not explain everything perfectly. He may circle the truth twice before landing on it. But when he speaks what he has been carrying through all those silent months, you will feel the accumulated weight of every night he spent reaching for something his pride would not let him name. And you will understand, not with your thoughts but with your whole body, that the distance was never rejection. The replacement was never evidence that you were not enough. It was evidence that you were too much for the version of him that existed then, and the version being born now is finally ready to hold what you are without breaking. And there will be a conversation, not the first one. The first one will be careful, tentative, testing the ground between you for weight-bearing capacity. But the real conversation, the one where he stops editing and starts telling you the truth about what he experienced when he tried to live without you. He will describe the new person without naming her. He will describe the moment he understood. And somewhere in that description, you will hear a tremor in his voice that you have never heard before. The sound of a man who has finally exhausted every alternative to honesty and is standing in the open air of his own vulnerability for the first time in his life. That sound will tell you more than his words ever could. Type, "No one compares," in the comments. Not as vanity, as recognition of a psychological truth his own lived experience has now confirmed. Here is what I need you to carry between now and that moment. Do not chase. Do not shrink yourself into a less intimidating shape so his ego can approach without trembling. Do not rehearse conversations or craft messages designed to accelerate a timeline that belongs to his soul and not to your impatience. Do not monitor his life for evidence that confirms or denies what I have told you today. The evidence is not on his social media. The evidence is not in his visible behavior. The evidence is in the persistent, unshakable knowing that lives in your own chest. The same knowing that brought you to this message in the first place. The quality that makes you irreplaceable is the very quality his persona found unbearable. Your depth, your emotional honesty, your refusal to live on the surface when your spirit was built for something sacred and consuming. Protect that quality. Water it. Let it grow louder, not quieter, in his absence. Your stillness is not passive. It is one of the most powerful forces operating in this situation right now. Every day you remain rooted in your own worth without performing it for his benefit. His unconscious registers the signal. Every day you refuse to beg for space that was always yours, the Imago inside him becomes more vivid, more urgent, more impossible to overwrite with any substitute the world could offer. You were never in competition. You were never at risk of being replaced. You were the original his soul recognized before his mind caught up. And originals do not compete with copies. They simply wait, with dignity, with grace, with unshakable knowing, for the world to stop pretending that imitations are enough. If this message carried something your heart needed to hear tonight, share it with a woman who is quietly carrying the same unanswered question. When you pass this forward, you become part of something larger than yourself, carrying truth to another soul who is waiting to hear that she was never replaceable. To continue receiving these messages when the timing aligns with what you need most, stay close. The next message that finds you may carry the specific answer this one began to unlock. You are the imprint he cannot erase. You are the depth he cannot replicate. You are the love that is already walking him home.